Welcome to Activist MMT, a podcast about real-world economics, including modern money theory, and how life changes when you discover it. I'm your host, Jeff Epstein.
Hi, Dirk.
Hi, Jeff.
I am very glad to be seeing you. I saw you 2 years ago at the summer conference.
Yeah,
I believe.
Yeah.
So very nice to talk with you again. We have a lot to talk about. How are you?
Yeah, thanks. I'm fine. As you said, I'm busy. I've started teaching at Torrance University since we've met. So the Torrance University has this master program in economics of sustainability. And it's a very nice, promising program where we talk about resources and we talk about money creation, and we try to merge these two and think about how we can create a sustainable economy that prospers. So that has been a very interesting development. And I'm teaching all year long. Basically, they have trimesters there. And I think the next course I would teach there is called Equity, Equality, and Employment. And I think there just has been a debate on Twitter where I think a German economist from University of Chicago has accused Kamala Harris of being a communist because she would talk about equity. And of course, equity has something to do with human rights, something to do with human nature. So it's a very complex subject. And the idea of equity is not the same as the idea of everybody should have the same wage, regardless of the effort put into the work. Right. So I think it's going to be a very interesting course for everybody to get a detailed picture of the concept that we are using, the figures of speech, and also the concepts that we have when we describe inequality, and also understand the major role of the government when it comes to unemployment, which is the main cause of poverty, by the way. So I'm looking forward to teaching this for the second time. This class, it's gonna be a lot of fun, I guess.
That's great. Yeah. So how did you end up? I got, obviously Stephen and Gabby, but how did it end up that you took this course? And why don't you describe the experience of you had to write this entire course? I mean, obviously you knew quite a lot, but what was that? How did that happen?
Yeah, I think this. Stephen approached me and said, "Look, we have this course, and we want to talk about these ideas, and it should really be about inequality." And it's going to be a complex kind of thing to teach because teaching MMT is one thing, but then understanding how society is kind of, the way that people have wages, for example, and how are these wages determined? You need to talk about market structure. Then you need to talk about development. So what can you buy with your money? Well, if you have high productivity in your country and you have a lot of industrial sector activities, and you will be able to buy a lot of goods and products. So it was always clear from the beginning that to some extent this would also be a class about development, and also talking about sustainable development. And it turned out that even 2 or 3 weeks into the class, I had to kind of admit to the students that this is not on the menu, this idea of development, but when you talk about equity, equality, and employment, you're really talking about development. Okay, so it's a very complex course. And when I was at university studying economics myself, there was one part of economics that was optional, and I chose development economics. So that was something that I was always interested in. And it was really nice to put some of these things together to understand more about how this works on the global level. Many people think that MMT only applies to the US, but no, of course, it's much broader. And if you look at the global level, we have 2 billion workers without job contracts. Okay, and that of course means there's a huge asymmetry of power. And this is something which is very interesting, and we should talk about this probably a lot more, about kind of global MMT. So why do we have poverty in these countries? Why is there no development? Why is there such high unemployment levels in so many countries? Yeah, that would be something which is very interesting, I guess, especially for maybe the United Nations, maybe the ILO, the International Labour Organization, and other international organizations who are dealing with these issues, including the WTO, the IMF. So yeah, it was really quite a lot of work to create this class, and I already have a lot of ideas how to change it and make it better, because it's an ongoing conversation. And the students are really great. So a lot of the students have already had work experience. Some are policymakers, and they bring in lots of perspectives from Australia, but also from the US and some European countries. I'm European myself, so we can talk about welfare states and what kind of power the workers have. Just to give you one example, in America, in the United States, companies can just leave and move all their machines to another country. If they would try that in Germany, they would have first to inform the workers about their plans. And then the workers can go on strike and try to stop that happening. So sometimes it's these little things that matter quite a lot, because in the US, the company can just send a notice on Friday afternoon and say, look, we're going to be closed from Monday onwards, so you will all be unemployed. Sorry about that, but we will move all the stuff to China over the weekend. And that is sometimes eye-opening for everybody, that these kind of institutional details, they can matter for macroeconomics, for distributions, for questions about distribution, for a lot of dimensions that matter to us.
Can you define development?
Yeah, that's of course that's already a main question. So in my class, I teach alternatives to GDP as an indicator of economic well-being for the society as a whole. So we will talk about public purpose, for example. So public purpose is a concept where you basically say that if there's a policy that addresses the well-being of the community while also maybe creating some losers, then this would be addressing the public purpose. We also talk about mainstream economics in the sense that we talk just a little bit about welfare economics, where you have this idea of the Pareto optimum, and that you have policies that should increase the well-being of a lot of citizens, but they should not decrease the well-being of a single citizen. So of course, this kind of putting it is very restrictive, and for policymakers, it's even impossible. Okay, so you cannot have an economic policy that makes nobody worse off. That's not going to happen. So when we talk about the major problems that we have today, talking about inequality, for example, talking about climate change, of course we need to redistribute to some extent income, and we need to redistribute resources. And with the concepts that you find in mainstream economics textbooks, you can't do that. And you need to have other metrics. And then you can look at public purpose, you can look at the happiness approach, you can look at the human development indicators. I think I have a couple of more concepts there. You can look also at the idea of universal basic services. So just to make sure that nobody is going hungry or is not having a house or flat, a roof over his or her head. So yeah, we discuss all these concepts. But development is a term. When we go back to the 50s and 60s, it was always clear to the so-called developing countries that they need to industrialize if they want to be rich like us in the West. And I think this is still very much central. Okay, so if a country wants to develop, it's about the question: how can I use my own resources to create goods and services that my people need? And one strategy that we have seen in the past is that these developing countries, they export primary products or raw materials, and then they import industrial products, manufacturing products. And the problem has been in the 50s, 60s until today almost, that the prices of bananas, let's say, price of a banana is more or less the same. It doesn't really go up over the decades, because you can try to market a banana differently, but normally these kind of inputs are not marketed by the country of origin. Not like champagne, for example, in France, which is just sparkling a wine from a certain region. So you have this problem of the terms of trade turning against you. So your import prices go up. So the Jeeps that you're importing to your country, they're always more expensive in US dollars, but the bananas that you export, always the same price, because there's also no productivity improvement. And how do we react to this? And many countries, of course, understood that they have to attract technology in order to create mass production, industrialization. And I mean, China is a prime example of how that can happen. Of course, it's a unique situation because China is so big. Having said that, India is also pretty big, and it's by now bigger than China. They have more inhabitants than China has. So the problem has always been, where do we get the technology from to develop our economy, to mass produce? And of course, for the 21st century, the challenge is even more difficult because you want to have a sustainable economy. So you don't want to have a use of resources that means that you will run out of resources eventually. So we're trying to create a debate about this as well. How to have, in the words of Stephen Held, sustainable prosperity. That's the important idea.
So I mean, the first thing that comes to mind regarding development, if you want to be like us, if you want to be rich like us, then you need to, I forget exactly the things that you said, but like technology or whatever it is. But it seems that's hidden behind that is like the, extraction, exploitation, the stealing, the big countries stealing from the small countries. Keep them. They want to prevent them from having high technology so that they remain dependent on the stronger countries, so that the stronger countries can exploit, can steal from the smaller countries. I'm pretty sure that that's part of the picture.
Yeah. I mean, right now, I think in the neoliberal age, this is more part of the picture than it was in the post-World War II era. So there you had institutions like the International Monetary Fund, which was created to have stable exchange rates. They were not pushing austerity policies at all. You had questions. You had institutions like the International Bank for Reconstruction of Development, which by now is well known as the World Bank. So they were supposed to fund infrastructure projects. And half a century ago, this was going into the right kind of direction, trying to help countries gain economic sovereignty, trying to have to get rid of the colonies and make sure that countries can be independent and also economically independent. That's what especially the US administration was pushing for at the end of the First World War, but also at the end of the Second World War. It pushed for countries being able to have self-determination. That was the term that they used. But in the last couple of decades, the international institutions have not been used for these purposes. Instead, they have been captured mostly by the credited countries and the creditor banks and the creditor wealthy people who are trying to make sure that in Argentina, for example, the Argentinian government can pay its US dollars to the bondholders of those US dollar denominated bonds. I think the president of Argentina and his government, they just moved out a lot of the gold reserves of Argentina in the last weeks. Not talking about it, but then there was a request in the parliament of Argentina to answer the question, where did the gold go? And then the government was kind of saying, okay, we admit that we have moved it out of the country for very strange reasons. So yes, the world that we see today is a world where we have more economic interests pushing for finance to ensure that those countries can pay their debts in foreign currency, and they're not interested as much as before in developing those countries. It would be in the interest of us as workers, if you want. So if I'm a worker in the US or if I'm a worker in Germany, of course, I would like to trade with countries who also have high levels of productivity, because then I can get a nicer product for whatever I have to offer. And it doesn't, I mean, for countries, it doesn't make a lot of sense to be neighbors with a country that is hopelessly lost in poverty and starvation, because they will hardly have anything to trade with you anyway. So for the general welfare, it would be better to have a country which is big and on your border, so that you can trade these goods and services with that country. That makes things easier, because it just follows from the idea of increasing returns to scale. So the more you produce, the cheaper it will be, because you have fixed costs. You can use a lot of machines, and these fixed costs are spread out over a larger range of output, so that the price goes down because the costs go down. And that's also something which we need in ecological economics, to produce things with the lowest amount of inputs. And so this is where economics and ecology meet, basically. And this means, again, that you try to create a market that is hopefully as large as it can be, minimizing transport costs and other barriers to trade. That's the progressive view on markets, if you want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's this keeping dependent, this issue, this concept of basically keeping the poor dependent on the rich, by kicking the ladder, in a sense of on a country scale, kicking the ladder of technology, so that they can't, or whether they're not allowing them to have military or high technology things that are bananas you can get anywhere.
Yeah,
you can't get supercomputers anywhere. And so the countries that make and produce supercomputers are going to be in a much better position than the countries, and self-sufficient than the countries that only sell bananas, for example. And I suspect that this is related. It's not going to seem related at first, but I suspect that this is. And it's even to the extent that, as homeowners, every homeowner is kind of expected to have your own lawnmower, your own every power tool that you have. You're like expected to have your own copy, and which is like, instead of sharing these things among the community. And so if something goes wrong, you share in the repair bill, as opposed to, my lawnmower broke, so I have to pay it myself. Everybody has their own lawnmower, then that makes a market for people repairing lawnmowers. So if you only have like one lawnmower shared among the entire block, then that reduces the need for repair shops. If you have fewer things to share around, then you have fewer people that need to support that. But that leaves you available to do other things which may be more valuable for the community. And I think this concept of, like, in a sense, we want to prevent people from having, on the country scale, we want to prevent, from a powerful country's point of view, in a negative, belligerent, whatever, to prevent them from having technology. But at the same sense, on this micro scale that I'm talking about, it's like you want to swamp everyone to have their own copy of what's not necessarily needed, to have this unnecessary duplication, which also, in a sense, keeps people trapped in a way. Do you see a connection there?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're right, because we should be talking a little bit more about human nature. I mean, the thing is that the way we are living in the Western countries is that we look at other people and we see what they have, and then we go, that's what we want to have as well. Okay, so we watch a lot of advertisements, and then we want to buy this kind of stuff. And when you see the advertisements by Google about artificial intelligence, with your mobile phone, you can now somehow make a balloon around some kind of pair of shoes on your mobile phone that you see somewhere, and then it will tell you where you can buy it, and then bang, you have it. Okay, so this is a human trait. We are copying machines. Okay, so we are parrots, and we are copying machines. And if you leave us unconstrained, we will all have the same kind of stuff, which is kind of a puzzle, because we think of ourselves as being very individualist. And then we're all wearing white sneakers, for example. In Germany, that's really a thing. Young people, they're all wearing sneakers, like 80% of them. So if you're in front of a class, 80% of the students have white sneakers. And then they say, oh, we're all free and individual, but you're all wearing the same shoes. An individual, and we just choose to do that. You see, so this is also what we see on financial markets. Just a short detour. It's herd behavior. Okay, so we are not independent. We're very social animals, and we want to be in certain groups, and this means we dress a certain way. And these white sneakers are just part of this code. And if everybody wants to have white sneakers, then of course it would be logical to have a very big factory that is churning out white sneakers, because that would be the cheapest way to produce those things. And of course, the company that has a monopoly on these white sneakers, because they're kind of really, really cool, and it has to be white sneakers from this or that brand, then of course they can make lots of money. So this is, I think, the connection that you probably have been looking at. So yeah, from the company's perspective, they want to have the only pair of white sneakers which is cool. So it is a question of cost, but also a question of demand for a certain product. So you're using marketing to induce this kind of demand. And of course, from the perspective of the company, it makes sense to have a very low quantity of competitors, so that you get a market share that is larger. So in terms of political economy, if you let the business sector take over your national policy, then of course you will be arguing that free trade is best in those industries where you have the biggest companies, because they can sell and they can compete and they get a bigger market share. But it's not necessarily the best for the workers, because the workers might be benefiting from having cheaper stuff coming from abroad. On the other hand, the workers also benefit to some extent from having industrial jobs inside your country. So to compare Germany with US, for example, in Germany we have lots of industrial jobs, and that means we have a very large middle class. In the United States, I just saw the numbers last month. In 2000, there were almost 18 million jobs in manufacturing, and in 2010, there were 12.5 million jobs in manufacturing. So roughly 1 in 3 jobs in the manufacturing sector were lost inside of 10 years. And then you have this movement in the United States, Make America Great Again. I think the idea is correct, that you need to bring those jobs back, because otherwise people will not have high wages. But of course, Donald Trump was misusing this for his own purposes. But the problem is real. There's a lack of industrial sector jobs, and the industrial sector jobs are those jobs that are well paid. And even in the service sector, those service sector jobs that are very close to industrial sector jobs, like working in marketing, working in IT, if this is close to the industrial sector, you will have a very nice wage. But if you're working in the service sector and you're working at McDonald's or Holiday Inn or something, or Best Western, then you get a very low wage. You get a minimum wage. And I think this is something which economists have not understood for many years. They always thought that the service sector would be the future. But in reality, those countries that have gained industrial jobs, they are the big winners, like probably Germany, China, to some extent Japan, even though people talk about Japan very negatively. And countries where the industrial sector has been going down, like in Spain or Italy, to some extent the United Kingdom, but also the US. There you have a lot of political trouble brewing, because there's a lack of good jobs, and people are angry about that. People are leaving. They don't know really what has happened. They just see that things are not as good as they were. So I would say that the average voter understands that things are not going well, but there's no economic analysis available normally when you live somewhere, I don't know, not close to university. Let's put it like this.
The job guarantee makes the economy run as hot as possible in the best sense, meaning exactly as hot as it needs to be, not too hot, because it goes to the places where unemployment is low. And as that changes, the job guarantee, it's perfect. I mean, it's by definition perfect. It puts jobs where they need to be. It releases jobs where they need to be, because the workers themselves choose to go to the private sector or out of the private sector. They choose themselves. So the economy runs perfectly hot, well, in a good sense, just as hot as it needs to be. No worker is unemployed. I mean, they're workers. They're not unemployed. So my lawnmower analogy, if you had like a community lawnmower, it would be used all the time. Because it would be going through your neighbors would schedule a time with it, and the lawnmower would be running all the time, and maybe it would break. A sensible thing would be have like a backup, or communities working together to have kind of a pool of a reasonable amount. So having a backup, so something would go into a repair, then the backup would be used. But the point is it's similar to the job guarantee. If you have enough for the community, that one lawnmower will be running very hot all the time, but that's okay. That's what it's designed to do. And if with the backup or the repair, but when everybody has their own, almost all of them are sitting unused in your shed most of the time. But what that does is it creates demand for companies to create unnecessary amounts of lawnmowers and repairs and extra delivery people and the stores to hold them and to make profit off of them.
Yep.
So let's stop doing that. And now immediately the first thing I think of is, well, now you're going to lose jobs because there's people whose jobs are to make these excessive amount of lawnmowers. And so the response to that would be, but there are other things possible to be doing that are more important than that. And then this is an analogy. I think this is in a sense it feels out there, but it also feels very connected to the job guarantee. It's not just one kind of job. It goes out to where it's needed. And so, yes, that would cause job losses, but those are jobs that are not critical, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. No, I mean, we do have some community services where we think it's too much to ask the individual to chip in resources or money. For example, we have public bus services. We have for transporting people, for example, there we have that. So we do have these kind of buses, and it's a community thing. So the community, you pay taxes to the community. They buy the buses produced by workers, and then you pay maybe at a subsidized rate. You pay for using the bus, and then it would be more economically efficient than using individual cars.
Exactly.
Normally we have a mixed system. Okay, so in Germany, for example, here in Berlin, you can own your own bike, you can rent a bike, you can share a bike. There's also public transport. We have bus, we have metro, we have light rail, we have high-speed trains to other cities. And people are using sometimes this mode of transportation, sometimes they use that mode of transportation. And the reason why still we have a lot of individual cars, which is very inefficient, is that we can't afford it. In the sense that you mentioned. So yes, people, if they want to own a car, they can still afford it. So in our street where we live, we have to pay a fee to the city for putting a sticker on our car, so we can park it in the street in this area. And the sticker costs 10 euros, which is roughly $10. They will probably increase the price of that to $10 per month, 10 euros per month. And then they will go up. And this is how we will probably reduce the amount of transport, individual transport in the city. I think in the background, we first have this human nature thing that we want to have our own stuff. So when we see that the neighbors have their own car, we want to have our own car too. But the resources are probably expensive to use and they're scarce. And the problem is that, of course, the cost to the environment of us using these cars is extreme. Okay, so this is not included in the price of the car, and this is why we need this Green New Deal to happen. Why we cannot just rely on the private sector and capitalism to solve these problems, because human nature is what it is, and we're just very happy of buying cars that we're not using much, but it's enough to create a big problem for the environment. And we could have more effective solutions like public transport. And you can still use your bike. Maybe you can still use a shared car eventually. So nobody's talking about somehow outlawing an individual car. But of course, when we talk about the CO2 emissions, we will have to change something. And it will be normal for us to use public transport in the future. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, it's actually the much better or much much more generally understood analogy is what you're saying, which is cars. Everybody has their own car. I mean, especially in the US, public transportation is not as convenient as it should be. Bikes, it's certainly not convenient to bike more than just your very local area, because everything it's a car culture. It is a heavily car culture in the US. It is rather impossible to live more than just to exist, within a few mile radius of your home, because everything's cars. I mean, I've heard of efforts of, eliminating public transportation in order to make cars basically force people to get into cars, making it more difficult to get into bikes. And the point of all these things is that it's all forcing individualism. It's glorifying individualism. It's forcing individualism. And, and when you force a car culture, then you're forcing, way more streets and highways and expanding those streets. And then there's maintenance of that. And then there's, like more accidents like in that. There's all of these consequences related to forcing individualism onto everybody. And it's really, it's individualism versus community, where we, in the long term, you can't survive without other people. Actually, my son, who just turned 18 years old, would love to be by himself all the time. He just would love that. I mean, when he's with us, he's really with us, but he would love nothing more than just to spend all day long just hanging out in his room. And I just always think of, you cannot survive in the long term without other people. And I need to see you with other people in the flesh, not through a computer screen. He has friends, but they're all COVID, he found a community through the computer.
Yeah.
And so now he won't go outside because there's nothing for him, because he won't go outside because there's nothing for him. And so I'm really just pushing with him that you cannot survive without other people. You're okay at the moment, but you cannot go out into the world without surviving without other people. And so it's this community versus individual, and all these analogies of even what you said about the guy at the Chicago Economist that called Kamala a communist, because basically she's taking one step towards community, away from individual to community.
Yeah.
Setting aside all the neoliberal Kamala blah blah. But I mean, the position of that guy who said that is basically, I can't know, but I think it's reasonable that the current distribution is what we need. A step towards away from individual to community, then that means I might have slightly less and those other people might have slightly more, and so that is unacceptable. With the current arrangement is the only thing that's acceptable, and to the horrible inequality is the only what we currently have is unacceptable, and any step towards, I'll say, reducing that is communism, is some horrible buzzword.
Yeah, I mean the mainstream economics. These professors, they have lost the script in a way. Many of them think of the individual as an individual that is completely free from society, and that's even the goal. So the idea of neoliberalism is also that you do not depend on others, and if you do, you just sign contracts with others, but you're not supposed to depend on social interactions. And this, I mean, this is a question really about the so-called Homo economicus. So we have this figure in economics that it's just about consumption. Okay, so when you do microeconomics classes, then you start with a question like, let's assume that the household has $10 and they want to have a Snickers bar or maybe two and maybe some Coca-Cola to drink. So it's just about how to spend your money so that you can have the highest maximum or the maximum utility from this. But this is, of course, this is wildly unrealistic. Okay, so if you imagine going out with your friends or with family, what you order in a restaurant and what you order in a bar, it's social context dependent. Okay, so when I'm out with friends, the amount of beer that I drink is not some kind of maximum or some kind of utility maximizing quantity, but it's just that if people, or if I'm kind of tired and I think about leaving, and then my friends order another round, then I have to decide whether I go home now or I order another beer with them and then I go home later. Whether the beer gives me any utility doesn't really matter. I just have it anyway. But the question is, do I enjoy being with my friends? So buying a beer means buying into a social group. And that's reality, and not the question, how much do I enjoy my beer? Of course, the marketing is geared like this, and this is probably also why a lot of professors of economics are by now so sure that it's all about individualism, but it's not. So there was this philosopher from Germany, like centuries ago, and he said that this is way before Margaret Thatcher came along and said there is no such thing as society. So this natural philosopher said that there's always the individual and there's always society at the same point in time. So you cannot have an individual growing up alone without society. It's not possible. Okay, and also you cannot have a society without being able to talk about single individuals. So it's all molded into one. So that means we just have to accept this fact that we are not independent as people, and we already talked about the increasing returns to scale in production. So that means when I'm consuming as an individual in my society, I will be buying a lot of things from others. That means I will be dependent on supermarkets. We have seen this during Corona, during the COVID pandemic. We are all depending on these systematically relevant jobs. Okay, people selling stuff in grocery stores and supermarkets, doctors of medicine, maybe also people who are driving buses. So these are the jobs that are really critical to our social lives. And we also saw during the COVID pandemic that our social lives matter. So you cannot just say, well, we have this kind of pandemic going on, so everybody please just stay home. We go mental as individuals. We need society. We are social animals, and there's lots of research from psychologists who are talking about monkeys and apes and also human beings and how they interact. And of course, what we need for a meaningful life is to have meaningful relationships with others. And that's very important. And that's the one thing that is completely out of current economics. They don't talk about that at all. So economics is just about consumption of stuff. And that's not right. So as you already said, there are certain things that should happen. For example, if you want to mow your lawn, you should be able to do that if you're so inclined. And it would make sense to do that with the least amount of resources possible. So that means that sharing is probably a good idea. And you're right. I mean, we're kind of stuck in a economy where we produce a lot of things that are discarded quite quickly. And there's a lot of things that we buy and then never use, for example. And this means that also we are working longer hours. I mean, if we wouldn't do all of that, we would be able to work maybe, I don't know, 30 hours a week instead of working 40 or even more in the United States. I think probably it's more like 45 or something more realistic as a workday. So yeah, I mean, this is all connected, and the benefit of getting these things right, of having more public policies that kind of free us from buying all this individual stuff and maintaining that kind of individual stuff and having to work longer hours or second jobs in order to maintain our income so that we can afford this kind of lifestyle. I think to some extent we have kind of maneuvered ourselves into a cul-de-sac, and we need public policy to get out of that.
A big lesson: less resources. We need to use less resources. A big lesson that I want to teach my children is to be happy with less. That's a really important lesson. You should be happy with just who you are, and be happy in your thoughts. You don't need to. You need to be happy with less in many different senses. And even people who take hot showers, like the only way that they can make a shower hotter is by turning up the heat, turning up the hot. But there's another way to do that. You can turn down the cold. And only one of those methods uses less resources.
Yeah.
Turning up the heat, we have hot water heaters that requires fossil fuels in order to make something hotter. But you can reduce the cold, which is a way of doing the same thing to a large extent by using less resources. So then you also said, it's impossible to be an individual without a community. I mean, community exists, you can't be separated. We pretend that they can be. And, you as an economist, you could be an author, an economist, an advisor, a researcher, but the only way that you become one of those things is by someone else deciding that you're one of those things. Someone hires you. They have to choose to hire you. And me, as a singer, someone has to choose to hire me. I mean, someone has to choose to listen to you. Someone has to, popularity by definition means that other people choose to listen to you, or, you know, to recognize you in some sense, or like you in some sense. And, you know, even buying my house, the seller has to choose to sell to you, which implies that you have to befriend that seller. If you go into this house that you really want and you call this seller a jerk, they're probably not going to sign the contract with you. And the same thing with someone who hires us. If we go in and the person that hires us, we call them a jerk, they're going to choose to not hire us. And you know, as a singer, the directors at these places, these senior centers where I perform, that's what I do. These directors, you have to be nice to these directors because you want to be hired by them. They have to choose to hire you. So by definition, you cannot be successful without somebody else choosing for your success to an extent. It is not possible to be successful at either one of our careers without other people. It seems that to somewhat of some extent, that neoclassical or whatever, neoliberalism or whatever, thinks that you can. That it's not about the person who hires you, it's about you. And if you're not good enough, then you're not being hired only because you're not good enough. And it's like, you know, illegals stole my job. Who chose to hire that person to make it such that you couldn't hire a job? You know, we're focused on the poor person that came in from another country and accepted a job that they desperately needed, as opposed to the person who chose to hire them and not to hire you. It's very interesting how all this pushing of individualism, and it's to a great extent, it's just complete nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, it's economics for a world that doesn't exist. So when we actually buy stuff, I mean, you bought a house, for example. Of course, we all know that there's such thing as perfect information. So a lot of our decisions, if we want to talk about realistic decision making, gut feelings matter a lot. Okay, so you probably saw a lot of houses, and then your gut feeling said at some point, this probably is a good pick. I don't think that I mean, I know you just a little bit, but I don't think you're the guy who does a spreadsheet and then you give points and then the house with the most points wins. I don't think you're one of those guys. They exist. They exist. But normal people, most of us, we just use gut feelings. And the more important the decision, the more we rely on gut feelings. Because normally these are one-time decisions. We don't buy a house every week. We don't marry somebody every week. So also when it comes to love, we normally use gut feeling quite a lot. So if we want to have an economic science which is describing empirical reality, we need to start with reality and then explain reality. And we're doing the opposite in mainstream economics, where we just say, okay, here's a couple of economic laws, so people maximize utility. And when you ask psychologists, they say, well, we don't do that actually. So there's a paper by Simon, forgot the first name, but he published a paper kind of famous in the 1950s, and he said that animals, just like human beings, are not maximizing. So they don't go for the maximum amount of food or the maximum amount of water to drink. They are doing something which he called satisficing. So they just...
Oh yeah, I read this in one of my Torrance courses.
Yeah, you see. So yeah, it's just that you're hungry and you want to eat something, and then you're not hungry, and then that's okay. You don't need to maximize anything. So I think you can make economics a lot more relevant to the real world if you would be more scientific. So this idea of saying, here's a couple of norms and here's a couple of economic laws, and here's a calculation method for having for calculating the maximum outcome of something like maximum utility. I mean, I haven't met anybody yet who's using this kind of microeconomics mathematics to do something in the real world. It's just completely inside our minds, and there's no practical purpose to this. So I think that that a part of the problem of the world that we see right now today is that we have been pushing in economics, which is very unrealistic, but it's the real world. And if you use a software based on ideas about hardware that are just not true, then you end up trying to run Mac OS on a Microsoft computer or an IBM. It's just work, and you will find out that the computer produces many different errors and miscalculations because you made some assumptions with your theory in your theoretical world that are not true. So we need to have a more realistic view of us as human beings, of human nature, and also social reality. And then we can design better economic policies where we have maybe shared tools for the garden on a community level, and maybe we also have less resource use on a society's level. And we are happy to live with less because we probably also will understand that I think the average American household has 10,000 things. I don't think that people will be using those all of the time. So we can probably limit that. I think the way to go forward is not to give a number out and say, okay, Americans should not have more than 9,000 things in a household. But instead to say, look, there's no need to have all this stuff in your shed and in your house. If you want to read a good book, you can read it online or you can borrow it in the library, and then you can just give it back and it's out of, you don't have to worry about where to put it. Okay, I see the books behind me, but okay, so I would also be happy with an online library. Okay, I don't need those books.
Library is community.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with having your own books. Certainly, there's obviously nothing wrong with that, but library is community. It's a shared resource of books.
Yeah, as before, you can have both. So you can own some individual books, or you can own some books individually, and you can have some books which you share in a library. I mean, this is not about having one or the other. It's not about having a socialist society where you share things or some kind of capitalist individual society where you own things. That's not the thing. We want to have some kind of hybrid system. But
I want to own my own computer. I do not want to own my own lawnmower. I would love a community lawnmower. I want my own computer. I want my own piano. I do not want a community piano. I mean, it's pretty obvious. It's pretty clear to me what I would choose to have. Things I use or are passionate about. I want to have my own copy of. Things that I'm not passionate about but I need to use like maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks. I want to share with other people. I would love to not have to have it in my shed. I would love to not have to worry about repairs. I would love to not have to worry about maintenance. So it's pretty clear to me already, just instinctually, of what I would want to have in each of these camps.
Yeah. You
said that there's no purpose to bad economics, or however the specific thing that you were saying. There's no practical purpose. I mean, there is. We're not going to get into it, but there is, which is propaganda, was just deceiving people in order to be able to do what you want to do. That is a practical purpose. But aside from that, so we spent the whole past basically hour. I appreciate you kind of helping me get my kind of out there analogies, but in a way that was kind of how I'm like mapping, these concepts to my actual life. So I appreciate you working through that. That was interesting. How about we start on, you just published a book, you're working on a second book, and you're teaching at least 2 courses, one at Torrens, one at wherever else. So you're extremely busy. That's only a part of what you're doing. So why don't we start off by your 2 books? So the one you just released, the title skips my mind at the moment, MMT something. And then can you just briefly compare the purpose or the content of both of those books?
Yeah. Okay. So I published, or Springer published a book in April, which is an introduction to MMT. It's called Modern Money Theory, a simple guide to the monetary system. And Springer has this book series, which is called Professional Practice in Governance and Public Organizations. So they wanted a book about MMT where there are no balance sheets and where I explain major concepts of MMT and also sectoral balances and other economic concepts that are connected to the, let me say, core of MMT, which is about the accounting of money flows. And it was supposed to be reasonably short, so I think it has roughly 150 pages.